Hi guys, Bomber here. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're gonna do a crafting guide for the Vespitole faction, which is the first. So, for the crafting guide, I will divide the cars in three categories. The third one is we'll have the cars which you don't want to pick in packs and upgrade the most. Then the second category is the one that it's halfway through the third and the first. So you want to pick those cars, but pick the cars in the first categories first, if you have the choice, and obviously max them first. And as said, the first category is the cars that you want to search in packs and upgrade with ingots the most. So, to divide those cars in those three categories, I will take into account several things. The first of all is the average power level of the car by itself, and also I'm going to look at the meta right now, and obviously I will rank those cars which are in the meta higher in this crafting list. But obviously the meta could change, and so the most factor for those choices is the power level on average of the card. Obviously also the cars can change, but then if those cars changes, then obviously the crafting guide will change as well. So starting off with the third categories, the first card is Bureaucrat. Bureaucrat really is not used in any meta decks, is not that strong even in the early stages of the game. It's just a card that you are not happy to have upgraded and in your deck in general, but it could be used in some fringe scenarios and some resource denial decks, and so that's it. Then the same reason probably is Embargo is actually really similar to Bureaucrat in the sense that it can only be used in resource denial decks, but those decks are not meta and not that powerful in the first place. Then we have Spy Network. Spy Network is probably good in the early stages of the game to just get the... But probably I don't even want to include it in the crafting guide as it is a Nero card, so never mind. Then there is on the Prosperity tab, we have actually the Surf, which is not really that useful in the early stages, and also is not included in some meta decks. Sometimes it is seen in some support option decks as a tech card, but really is not the main focus of the deck, and so I will not include it in the first category only because of that. In all the other general uses of the Surf, it is not that strong, and so it is on the third category. Then for the same reason of the Spy Network, there is also Theta, but as said before, it's an hero card, so I will not include it in the crafting guide. Then we have Harvest instead, which is on the same fashion of Spy Network and Theta, but for food, and really those cards are not that competitive on the high level play, but it is indeed really useful in the early stages of the game. So definitely go for it if you want to build a Vespitole ally deck, as said on my budget decks on the previous videos. Then for the Faith tab, we have Bishop, which is really not that strong of a card. It could be used sometimes in some Benediction pocket deck, but there are better options than the Bishop, and probably those are Catapults, Warships and stuff. So really Bishop is a card which is good by itself, but it's not that powerful in meta decks and high level play, and so and also it's not that strong in the early stages of the game. So really, there is not so much point in going for the Bishop. Then on the same fashion for the Spy Network, Theta and Harvest, and there is also Liturgy, which is, as said, is not that strong because, but it is good in Vespitole ally decks. But probably since it is a rare, you want to go for Harvest instead of the Liturgy on the early stages, and so really this card is not that strong in the meta, and so it is on the third category as well. Then for the War tab, we actually have all the soldiers of the War tab, so Mercenary, Soldier and Knight, but not the Militia. And the reason why for this choice is because really those cards are not that strong, because in the Pocket Benediction decks that I said before, you want to go for strong on-turn effects, and so you want to go for Catapults, Ballistas, Warships and stuff. Instead, those allies are more for protection. But really, in the highly level meta play, there is not that much protection played, if not for really efficient ones, and the Mercenary Soldier and knights are not that strong, and also in particular the soldier and the knight are really weak against seduce effects, and so really they are not that considered in the meta. And for that reason, they are as well on the third category. And then for the final card for the third category, we have Rampart, which as probably the same for Soldier and Knights and Mercenary, it's a protection card, and it's not that strong because it is too expensive. It is indeed true that it is not weak against seduce effects, but really it is as well another time you don't want to protect too much on high level play of meta, and it is not a really efficient protection because it is too expensive, and you most of the times want a little protection to just snowball the situation out of control on the early stages. And Rampart can't be played on the first turn if you don't go for a Loan, but then you only go for the Rampart on the first turn with a Loan. Instead, you want to probably go for a Loan, a protection card, and some glass cannons so that you can snowball out of control in the early stages. And Rampart doesn't give that advantage, and so it is not that strong. Then, going at the second category, we start off with Courtesan, and really this is probably the same for all the Vespitole allies, which are glass cannons, so like Courtesan, Wealthy Pattern, and stuff. Really, this is just an efficient ally. It is not that strong to be considered meta, but it is indeed strong, and so you want to go for it, in particular on the early stages of the game. If you are a new player, the Courtesan is definitely pretty strong. Then we have Tribute, which is indeed a powerful card, but is not that much seen into the meta, but occasionally it is seen in some Isadora decks with high cycling powers and like Olive Rat or Malediction as win conditions and stuff. So definitely Tribute could be also seen in the meta, but it is not that strong to be considered meta by itself, and so it is slightly on the second category instead of the first. Then we have Usury, which is indeed the most powerful of the resource denial cards, which I said before, like Bureaucrat and Embargo. And indeed, Usury is the card that actually makes those decks viable, but not as viable as making them strong. But Usury itself can also be used just as an economy tool, and is indeed pretty strong, but not as strong to be considered meta, but indeed pretty strong. Then for the Prosperity tab, we have Collect Taxes and also Thief, which is pretty similar to Collect Taxes. They are not that strong to be considered meta, again, but they are indeed usually seen on some Miracle decks to just have more cycling capabilities and a little bit more economy. So indeed you want to watch out for those cards if you want to build that particular meta deck. But indeed they are not necessary for that type of deck, and so they are indeed on the second category as well. Then we have Wealthy Pattern, which, as I said before, for the Courtesan is actually a glass cannons and an ally, a very efficient ally that you want to grab on the early stages of the game, and it's really strong on that context, but not on high level meta play, and so indeed another time a second category card. Then we have Banker, which is pretty much similar another time to those allies like Courtesan and Wealthy Pattern, in the sense that it is a really glass cannons for economy, and also it is somewhat more situational than Wealthy Pattern and Courtesan, because you can't never get value from the Banker the turn that you get it out on the board, because for example the Wealthy Pattern you can use food to get gold, instead with the Banker it has to survive, or you need to combo it with a Benediction and activate it on the turn that she gets out of your hand. And indeed, this is the use that you are going to see for the Banker. In some Pocky Benediction decks, you maybe see the Banker, and that's the only viable deck with this strategy on the meta, but it is not that meta of a deck, and so another time is on the second category. Then for the Fate tab, we have another time the Supplicant, which is indeed a little bit weaker than the glass cannons like Courtesan and Wealthy Pattern another time, in the sense that it only produces one resource compared to his other comrades, and but it is indeed seen sometimes in some variation of Olive Rat's Isadora decks. Those variations when you have food instead of magic production, and then you use a supplicant as a way to convert those food into magic. So it could be seen sometimes in those type of decks, and so for that reason, another time, even though it is a bit weaker than his other comrades, it's still sometimes seen in some meta decks, and so another time it is indeed on the second category. Then we have Benediction, which, as said, is the focal card, the key card of that second tier deck, which is the Pocky Benediction deck. So definitely, if you want to go for that deck, then Benediction is the card for you. But it's not that meta, and so another time on the second category. Then Malediction, which is usually seen in some meta decks, because if you want to run Isadora, which has a meta deck, probably you want to introduce Malediction as well. But most of the times you don't want to run Malediction because this is not your win condition or key card. It's just a tech card most of the times, and so it has not what it takes to go on the first category, but it is indeed a second category card. Then we have Synod, and this one is pretty contradictory. So many of the players will be upset with this decision, but really, if you see on the meta decks, Synod is usually not included. And by meta decks for Vespitole, I mean the Merchant Guild, the Inquisitor Lystrata, and the Suffer Option and the Isadora. Probably the only deck that wants to see the Synod is probably the Isadora with Olive Rats, and also sometimes the Suffocator. But myself, I've seen that the Synod is not that consistent in increasing your win rate. It is true that it can recover you from a bad situation when you didn't grab and actually restock the card that you needed. But if you are in that situation already, then probably you can't do anything to recover from that situation. And so most of the time, Synod is a card which tries to help you recover the game, but actually most of the times just hinders your bank with the dead card, which is Synod. So you are trying to recover with this card, but most of the time this is the reason why you need to recover, because you are not getting the card that you want to restock, and instead you get this dead bro. But definitely Synod is indeed a strong card, and so it is without doubt on the second category, and probably, as I said, it is also on the first category, but me myself, I decided to take it on the second category instead. Then we have on the worst tab, actually, Marshall, which is another time a pretty slow ally to do for itself. But it can be comboed with the Benediction that I said before in that Pocky deck. But most of the times going for Marshall and then Benediction is actually pretty much overkill, but not that much. And so you probably want to go for the Marshall and the Benediction as well. Actually, the Benediction and the Marshall as well. But most of the times, another time, if you want to go for that combo, that deck and in which you want to do this combo is not that strong already. And that combo is not that viable even in that deck. So definitely not a third category card, but it just barely gets into the second category. So that's it for the Marshall. Then we have Catapult, and might as well go for Warship and Ballista, because another time in that second tier deck, which is Pocky Benediction, you want to have allies which are really glass cannons. Those are really glass cannons in the sense that they actually do damage, and Catapult, Warships, and the Ballistas are the best glass cannons in that deck, so that you can really rush your opponent out with those really efficient attackers, and the Benediction to actually even more fasten them up. So those are the cards in that second tier meta deck, and so as it is not a first tier meta deck, they are another time on the second category. And then we also have Palisade, which is indeed the best protection you have access to in Vespitole. Compare it, for example, to Militia or Surf. It actually costs one more than the Surf, and one actually the same with the Militia, but it has double the intercepts. So definitely this is the most efficient way to protect your allies. But indeed, even if you want to have protection, most of the times you don't run protection at all in those meta decks that I said, because really right now in the meta we only have rush decks and you don't want to protect at all. But if you want to protect, then Palisade is indeed the best protection out there, and it is probably also run sometimes in the Miracle decks, which is indeed a meta deck, unfortunately, and so probably, but as a tech card, and so it is indeed a second category card. Then, going for the first category, finally, we have, first of all, Corruption, which is obviously a first tier crafting, like a card to craft in the first category, because it is a card which is the key card on a meta deck, which is the Suffer option, obviously, so definitely a card to craft and max as soon as possible. Then on the same deck we also run Courtly Intrigue, which is, by the way, also good even not in that deck, so definitely a good card, and it is included in a meta deck. On the same fashion, there is Masquerade Ball, which is another time run into the Suffer option deck. Then Bounty, which is definitely a pretty strong card and also a key card in those decks. Actually, this is the win condition of most of Vespitole decks, so definitely a card to craft and max as soon as possible. And it is indeed used in a meta deck, which is the Suffer option, so definitely a very good card to have. Then on the same fashion, another time, we have Spice Road in the Merchant Guild Lystrada deck, which is pretty similar to the Suffer option, but with food instead. And most of the times it has the variation with the Inquisitor instead of the Bounty, so definitely Spice Road another time a meta card in a meta deck, definitely pretty strong. Then we have Vintner, which is used in the same Merchant Guild Lystra. Actually, there is obviously the Merchant Guild in that meta deck, but as said before, it is an hero card, and so you don't have to craft it or search it for int packs, if not for the hero, but so I will not include it. But definitely a meta card, the Merchant Guild. Then we have Winter, as said, which is another time included in that deck, the Merchant Guild Lystrada, with usually the Inquisitor variation, so definitely a pretty strong card and included in a meta deck. On the same fashion, we have Trade Company, which is another time included in the same deck, so another time a first category card. And then we have Loan. And Loan, really, it is not even a first category card to craft, but it's actually like a zero category card to craft, because Loan is literally included in any Vespitole deck, which is somewhat viable and competitive. Because really, Vespitole has the ability to snowball out of control the more the games goes on, but most of the times it is probably too slow. And Loan just removes this weakness by giving you a jump start, and then obviously you have to pay it back, but you don't actually care most of the times of the payback thing, because you gain that advantage, and which actually made you faster, which is your weakness as a Vespitole. So definitely Loan is the first category card, if not even higher than that. So definitely Loan is the first card that you want to max for Vespitole. Then, for the Fate tab, we have Inquisitor, which is definitely the key card and actually the win condition on the Merchant Guild Lystrada Inquisitor variation, but it is indeed on the first category, so I will not put it out by any means. But as a new player, I will probably go first for the Bounty variation, and then only then, when you actually are a bit more experienced, go for the Inquisitor variation. Because most of the times the Inquisitor variation, in my opinion, is much faster than the Bounty variation, and it is so indeed stronger than the Bounty variation. But the Bounty Merchant Guild Lystrada is already pretty consistent and viable as well. And the Inquisitor is only slightly better, so you want to go for it only when you are really more experienced and on the end, actually on the high end of meta play and stuff. So definitely Inquisitor is a very strong card. Then we have Prayer, and actually on the same note Devotion, since they are really strong, which are actually pretty similar, and they are really strong because they are used in a meta deck, which is the Olive Rat Isadora, so as well the Olive Rat is indeed on the first category, so all those three cards, Prayer, Devotion and Olive Rat, and you may see why, because they obviously synergize with the Olive Rat, and the Isadora Olive Rat in particular is a really meta deck, and so Prayer, Devotion and Olive Rat are all on the first category cards to craft, as they are included in a meta deck. Then we have Sabling Scroll, which is another time a really strong card in Vespitole, and it is not so much seen into the meta, because it is indeed a very, very strong card, but most of the times you actually have to spend a turn, to grab the Sibylline Scroll, and you probably don't want to go for it. But it is indeed run in some decks, like for example the Suffer option and the Holy Wrath Isadora, as a way to, you already grabbed your Corruption or your Holy Wrath, and if you just grab it another time, you probably win. And so the Sibylline Scroll is a win condition when you already grabbed your win condition. And as it is included in the Suffer option and the Holy Wrath Isadora, then as Sibylline Scroll is as well a first category card, as it is included in a meta deck. Then we have Miracle, and really I say this, it's really unfortunate that we have Miracle as a first category card to craft, but it is indeed a meta deck. The Miracle spam with Pocky is indeed pretty strong, and actually Miracle is just a strong card to include in any Vespitole deck, and most users define it as a button to press when you have lost, and this card may save the day for you, with no skill at all. So it is indeed strong because it is the way to recover from a bad situation. It is really inconsistent, as it is it has a RNG nature, but it is indeed pretty strong, and the win rate actually says this. So definitely it is a strong card. It is a first category card, but I will not suggest to craft it because it is an RNG card and I hate energy. But this obviously is a subjective opinion, and the objective opinion is that this is indeed a meta card included in a meta deck, and so it is in a first category card. But don't craft it because I don't like it. So with that apart, the last card which is on the meta and it's really strong is Lead the Charge, but another time it is a hero card, and so no need to craft it at all, and so it is not included in the crafting guide, but remember that this is a really strong card. Obviously included in the Isadora Holy Wrath spam or Malediction spam. So that's it for this video. Hope you liked it and find it useful. Be sure to leave down below a comment to let me know what you want to see in the next videos, and as always, see ya.